again, just putting a theory into practice, really.
Excellent. Thanks, Marcus. And finally, we've got Andy Wisheart, who is our Resilience Manager here in New Zealand.
Hi there. Nice to see you all. My name's Andy. Obviously, I will be helping Brad this afternoon and in a couple of weeks' time. My background is in the emergency services. I was a paramedic for 12 years and then working in health emergency management and sort of general health management before coming over to Risk Logic. So that's the 10-second version of me.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. Always thinking about the time. Good lad. So what I'll do is just quickly, we'll just really quick intro just around the room or the virtual room, just to see who we've got on the call here. We'll start off with Kevin, if you just let us know, I guess, where you're from and what you're looking to get out of this course.
So I'm Kevin. This one over here is James, so he'll come on after me. We're at the Department of Finance in West Australia. We're business resilience managers and we're running our critical incident team at the moment. Our BCI and all our BC is part of our audit and risk function, so, and we're both accredited as BCI people.
Excellent.
Yep, that's we're both business resilience managers, and as Kevin was saying, we're part of our audit assurance and risk team. There's also one other person who's part of that, and that's the director, but he's not part of the course at the moment. My background is predominantly in an audit area, so I've done external financial audits, performance audits, ICT background audits. Currently, I'm working in audit with the Department of Finance. So, and the BC responsibility has come to us more by default rather than design. So we've had to quickly get up to speed over the last 2 years to build up the experience and expertise to be able to run and administer BC within the Department of Finance. So we're hoping to get a fair bit out of this course, particularly in terms of the crisis management side of things. Yeah, so over to you guys.
Great, thanks. Who we've got next? Sharon, I believe you're on the call somewhere.
Hello. Yes, I'm a senior risk partner at the Transport Accident Commission in Victoria, and I'm part of the crisis management team and currently our recovery response working group. So our BC expert retired just before COVID, so we've sort of picked up. Like Sandy was yeah, so our team has sort of picked up all of that, but I'd like to, yeah, I think I'd like to get a little bit more across our BC and just, yeah, resilience. I really liked the topics that you were covering, so yeah.
Right. Awesome, thanks Sharon. Natalie.
Yeah, hi. I'm from the University of Newcastle. I'm part of their business continuity team here at the uni. I'm also on our critical incident team, and I'm also on our COVID team, which is currently managing the current events, shall we say. Yep. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the course content.
Awesome, thank you. Have we got Mark there as well? Because I can't see your name, Mark, but there was someone that just had a COVID.
No, we've got, that's Jeff, Brad.
Oh, is that Jeff?
Yeah.
Sorry, Jeff. Go for it, Jeff. You might have to. No, we can't hear you, Jeff, for some reason. Can't hear you, Jeff.
I'll message Jeff and see
yeah,
if he
I think Jeff can hear us, but we can't hear
speaker,
Jeff.
As I couldn't hear anyone, so I plugged in a speaker which might have muted my mic. Is that okay?
Perfect. Booming through.
Good. Yeah, hi, starting again. I'm Jeff, based in Auckland. I'm an independent crisis and security consultant working with one of the major banks in New Zealand, who brought me in with great timing towards the end of last year to rebuild a crisis management framework, which was operationalised very quickly, as it was for all of us, I guess, with COVID. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm just working through that process with them now.
Awesome. Great, thanks, Jeff. Vanessa.
Hello everyone, my name is Vanessa and I actually work at RiskLogic. I am their National Client Engagement Manager based in Melbourne, with a role that takes me across New Zealand and Australia, and this is the first opportunity that I've actually had to complete the fundamentals course, as it has not run locally in Melbourne. So one of the things that has come from COVID is obviously the virtual aspect, and my ability to be here today, and definitely what I'm looking at getting out of it is much more of a deeper dive into business continuity and crisis management.
Awesome. Thanks, Vanessa. So there are a couple of people that doesn't look like they're on the call, but if I haven't called your name out or said anything, shout out now if I can't see it. But if not, we will we'll carry on, guys. So yeah, so Marcus and Tim, you are excused to go and do some more work, and look forward to seeing you guys a bit later on in the course.
I'll see you in a few weeks' time, guys. Look forward to it.
Thanks, Brad. Cheers.
Thank you. All right, guys, so let's do a bit of the old customary admin. So look, 2 hour sessions, and hopefully we're all, the timings are now locked in. So it's, well, 12:30 for New Zealand, and wherever you are in the world, if you can figure out what the timings are for that, they're all at the same time going forward. Please, look, we want as much interaction on this as possible. It's the same thing we do in our face-to-face training sessions. It's great to have so many different, we've got people here from finance, you know, government, you know, transport, etc., who all got your own experiences, and we really want to share that. And it's not just about me rubbing it onto you for 2 hours, or Andy. It's actually getting some feedback and view of the world from your side of things. Look, there's so much been going on, and all of us that are in this profession, we've never been so busy with COVID. So really keen to understand, you know, what you're seeing and what you've learned, and let's share that across everyone, and we can all learn something. The sessions are fairly short, but we will have a quick kind of break in between, sort of halfway point, just to either grab a cup of tea or got an urgent phone call you have to make. That's fine. I am recording all these sessions, so the sessions will be available, plus the PowerPoints when we've completed the course. So if you do have to dash off for any reason, you can always just catch up later on. If there's anything outside of the stuff that we're covering on the agenda, then we'll just kind of park that. Although we've got a fair bit of content to get through, and I want to try and get through that. But basically, you've got me for the next 6 weeks. If there's something you guys want to contact me about, then you know that we didn't have time to discuss, then happy to do that, and make sure we're covering off everything. So yeah, we're all using Zoom, obviously, and we're all having fun and games with that, as we normally do. Hopefully everything's going to work fine and we're all good. So look, just I guess some of the kind of, not rules, but just ways to kind of do this. It's up to you guys. I don't mind looking at your happy faces, but if you want to just kill your cameras and go on mute until you have to say something, because then it kind of alerts me to someone has got a question, that's fine, or you can keep your cameras on the whole time. I've got no issues with that at all. It's really up to you, but we do need to, obviously, if you've got a question, make sure I'm seeing you or hearing you and we're getting that answered. There are obviously the old thumbs up and the hand waving symbols you've got there on Zoom down the bottom. So if you want to get my attention, you can be doing that. So and if I say, look, everybody happy, thumbs up from a couple of you is great, then I know we can move on. We may need some breakout rooms later on in the session, but probably not today. But we'll see how we go. But if we do that, then we'll get that set up, and it's pretty straightforward. If you just want to, obviously Kevin and James are in their own breakout room already, so that's good. So, but if we want to do any others, we can do that as we go through. So pretty straightforward. Hopefully, it should be no dramas as we go. I just want to quickly go through then what the actual course entails, just to give a little bit more detail what we're covering over the 6 weeks. So today then we're going to start with some disruption preparedness, and just what we would term as best practice, being prepared for these unexpected events, and looking at that capability across your organization. Second part then we'll look at some pandemic management cluster response. So Andy's going to take you through again, just kind of reviewing and looking at obviously what this whole pandemic's been about, and some statistics around that, which are pretty important to understand, and how that then relates back to your preparedness, and where that fits into what we would call your response capability. The second session then, we're going to be going through, we're going to look at some program management leadership. Now, for James and Kevin, who I believe, listening to what you were saying there, it sounds like you've done the CBI accreditation course, so you'd be familiar with the life cycle in that first part of that course. And if you like, we actually run those courses, and as I'm sure you remember, the policy and framework piece is the hard bit to get through, and because policy is really exciting, isn't it? But it is actually critical to building a really good foundation in your organisation. So I do want to touch on that. And just kind of re-emphasize how important it is to get that in place, so the rest of your program will manage through. Second part of that session then, we'll be looking at the threat environment. Obviously our threats going into COVID are still there. Some have increased, some have decreased, and just really a chance to look at that and see some of the stuff that we should be focusing on now in this new world that we find ourselves in. Session 3 then, sorry, did I jump one there? To move around. Session 3, we're going to again start to dive a bit deeper into business continuity, and focusing on actually doing some analysis and preparation to be prepared for these events. One of the things that we've found talking to new and existing clients is that we moved into this work from home environment reasonably quickly, and a lot of organizations hadn't gone through and done the BIAs and their analysis, and we're kind of just flying by the seat of their pants and got caught out. So I think it's really important just to go back and look at the BIA and understand what that can give us, and then from there, then actually developing our strategies, some of which may be our working from home environment. So again, we'll dive a bit deeper into that, and some of the considerations we need to think about when picking those strategies. Our fourth session then is diving a bit more into crisis management. So this is when we're really going to look at some of the fundamentals of crisis management, and how stress actually impacts us in these events. And I'm sure some of you been through COVID have seen how people have dealt with this in various different ways, some good, some bad probably, and just understanding how the stress can really impact us. We find that most people are already stressed out for whatever reason, and then we throw a crisis at them, and it's just going into that already stressed can be really challenging, and how you deal with that. And a key part of actually responding to these events, whatever they might be, is developing situational awareness, and how that can assist you then in managing information and actually coming out with a solution. So we'll dive into a bit of that as well. Session 5 then, as Tim mentioned there, is crisis communication. So such a critical component of any event is getting good comms out. And again, we've seen good and bad instances of that over the last few months with COVID. That comms, not just internal, but also external to our stakeholders. So Tim will talk through this communication strategy and some of the things you need to consider putting into place to be able to ready to deal with these events in an effective way. And then the last session then will be the validation piece. So that's going to be effectively bringing together what we've done, but looking at our, as Marcus said there at the beginning, our online crisis command tool called CQ Command, which is run and developed by our sister company Catalyst Technologies. So what we'll do is get an opportunity to look at that tool, and we've found, again, with the environment that some of our organizations are working in, not being able to come together as a crisis team, what are the options around being able to do that remotely? And obviously people have been using Teams and Zoom, etc. But actually having a tool to help you build up that situation awareness is really important. And we'll, Marcus will take you through that tool and obviously do a bit of a little scenario, and then my understanding is that you guys will have a license that you can take away for a period of time, free license to, maybe show it back in your organization, and if you want to move forward, you can always come back to those guys, but an opportunity just to play around with that. So quite a packed few weeks, and we're trying to obviously do that blend of business continuity, within mind of what's going on at the moment with COVID, but also that crisis management component as well, because we are actually still kind of in this crisis. It's still obviously happening, and we're seeing new waves coming, etc. So crisis management is critical to any organisation when it comes to responding. So any questions then, guys, on the agenda over the next few weeks? Good. All right. Well, let's get into it then. So we'll start about disruption preparedness, and something that we recommend best practice to have within your organisation. So when I'm talking to to new prospects, etc., I would basically show them this response triangle and ask them to overlay it to their business, and ask them if they can or they have capability across these three response areas. So tactical, operational, and strategic response. Now, tactical response then is having capability for our first responders. So in events like fires or anything where we have to evacuate people, or possibly keep people in if we have to lock them down. So having that initial first response and having a team in place to do that is critical. Now, from an Australian point of view, there is a compliance standard around that. So AS 3745, which is there to obviously make sure organisations have got warden teams, they've got plans, they've got drills in place, and they're following that. So, but New Zealand, in my opinion, we probably will get to that where it is a compliant regulation, but we absolutely should be doing that anyway. So really critical to have those teams in place. And one of the things we found through COVID is that obviously because people have not been in their buildings for a long time, we've been working from home, all of those standards have kind of slipped by the wayside, and it's really critical that when people start moving back, that they're reinforcing, training their wardens, providing that capability so that they're safe in their environment. So that would be our first recommendation, then having a good tactical response and understanding where their level of responsibility ends. So a warden's job is to get people out of the building to the assembly area, but beyond that, then they're not expected to think about any operational business continuity components. Their job effectively is done. The next level then above that then is our operational response. So this is where we're going to see possibly our incident management teams, our business continuity teams, maybe our IT response teams, any of those kind of responses, incident response. At schools, we have critical incident response, where the operational aspect needs to kick in, where we're going to have some level of management decision. Communications may start. We may be looking at having to restore critical business functions, depending on how severe the initial event was. And again, having teams and structures in place there to be able to deal with that, having documentation that they can follow, making sure those individuals are trained and that they can enact their response in a timely manner, because ultimately business continuity is all about lessening the impact. So the more effective we are in doing that, the less the impact of the organisation. And then the top tier then is our strategic response. So again, this is where we're now starting to look at brand reputation impacts to our organisation, where we need a strategic leadership team, whether it's our crisis team, our strategic leadership team, whatever we want to call it, actually activating and dealing with those severe incidents that require that response. And the critical thing here then is that we have information flowing up from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, command and control and instruction flowing down. So all of those teams require information to make decisions, and that's why that information flow is important, and teams understanding what their escalation points are. So when does our chief warden escalate into that next level of operational response? When does our operational team need to get the crisis team activated? So that's something we see breaking down quite a lot, is that escalation piece, and people not sure of when they should be doing that. What are the trigger points to have in place to make that happen? As I said, that would be my question to you then is if you haven't got capability across those 3 areas, then you've probably got a gap in your response capabilities, and it's something that you really need to consider. What we do see with some organisations that they would combine operational and strategic, so that one team would be able to deal with that. I'm sure you've probably seen that, but larger organisations will have those 3 tiers clearly defined and put in place. And does that make sense to everyone? People seeing something similar in that space? Yeah, thumbs up. Excellent. Real thumbs up. That was even better. Okay, so that's, as I said, our incident response capability and what that looks like. Now, when we're dealing with the events, we generally would move through what we call our incident timeline here, and with our haystacks clearly identified, taking us through from our initial incident that's happened all the way through to hopefully business recovery. Now, our initial response, then we're going to have this incident response where we're assessing what's happened to us. What does this event mean to us? What are our response requirements? Do we need to activate our team, etc.? Really dealing with the here and now of the event. Lot of activity and effort in that first response piece, and from there, if we've made those correct decisions, we've activated, and we may then be able to then move ourselves into our crisis management phase. So this is where we're starting to look very strategic and go, well, what does this mean to us as an organisation? How do we actually need to manage our way through this, and then possibly having to do that business recovery piece. Not every event requires business recovery. We do have events that are purely, I guess, reputational if something's happened, but we do need to have a coordinated response. And you'll see obviously that the overlap into the different areas. So we're not stopping one and starting the other. We're still a component of response while we're in crisis management, and business recovery can start fairly early on in the crisis management piece, but crisis management will continue. And the more effort we put to the left of our effort line here in preparation, planning, etc., the smaller these haystacks are going to be, because we've got more control, we've got more procedures in place, people know what they're doing, and we can effectively have an effective response. And when we are dealing with these events, we do need to think about the impacts to our organisation. Now, in general terms, the impacts are our people, our brand, so brand and reputation, our people, possibly some legal and compliance we may have in place if we're that type of organisation, financial definitely, and operational. So there are other ones in there, but they would be our I guess our key impacts. Any impacts to those are going to affect our organisation, and again, we have to have appropriate strategies in place to deal with them if they come our way. And as we know, many events happening all the time, and we're all going through one at the moment. But just wanted to touch on a couple historical events that have happened, just as a bit of a case study. First one then being Dreamworld. So this is definitely a brand reputational impact to this organisation. So I'm sure you're all aware, a couple of years ago now, with the theme park incident on the water ride, where tragically 4 people were killed. A lot of publicity and information coming out about this, but this event really is a real case study of back to that triangle of how you can pretty much fail across all 3 of those response capabilities if you don't have good planning and preparation in place. From a tactical point of view, they hadn't really done any proper evacuations of the park, so they didn't know how to evacuate people safely. Operationally, they clearly didn't have business continuity or incident response plans in place, because there was a breakdown there. As an example, they tried to reopen the park way too early before even consulting with emergency services. They had a strong incident management plan in place. They would have an emergency response coordinator who would have been dealing with that, and realised that couldn't happen. And then strategically, obviously, a lot of the publicity coming out, not so much for Dreamworld, but for their parent company, Ardent Leisure, who were basically the umbrella company for Dreamworld. They own a few other companies. They were running their AGM that the week of that event, and they failed to postpone it, and they failed to change the agenda. First item on the agenda was the CEO's salary increase for that year, which the press, as you can imagine, were all over. So really, really terrible stuff coming out of that event. And again, you can just look at it and see where those components are breaking down. And obviously, you know, through the colonial inquiry that's happening, you know, people losing their jobs, obviously, and there's still a lot more to come from this event, I believe. But yeah, massive reputational brand impact. Next one then, Virgin Australia. So, you know, this is a COVID one. You know, this organisation, you know, 8,000 workers have been made unemployed. I'm sure, you know, the guys in Oz are probably well across what's going on at Virgin, but, you know, massive loss. 90% of their, you know, travel flights no longer running. Still discussions at the moment about them going into receivership. But yeah, really massive impact from a people point of view here. You know, their people have massively impact. And you could argue that, yeah, look, it's COVID, you know, it's just the way it is, unfortunately. But, you know, the things that organisation could have done better to try and save jobs. You know, I think there's about 600 staff in New Zealand, 900 staff in New Zealand lost their jobs, and they're complaining that that the organisation didn't accept the government's 12-week wage subsidy. So, you know, why did they do that? And people have now lost their jobs. So again, you look at Qantas, they're still operating. They haven't sacked as many people. So what? Two businesses doing the same. Why? What's the difference? And could they have done things better? And I think one of the other things that's coming out, the tagline that's out at the moment that a lot of organisations using is, it's unprecedented times. That's not really an excuse. You've got to have better strategies in place to protect your people, and that's what we have to keep going back to. Is you know, that's why this stuff's important. It's people's livelihoods, and it's not just about business. So that's the people impact. The next one we've got then is PageUp. So I don't know if you guys have been across this one. So PageUp are they're effectively a HR website. So they provide job ads and HR information for, you know, big ASX 200 companies. So they've got the likes of Coles, Australia Post, Audi. They've got some universities on there. So I'm not sure if Natalie, if you use these guys, but you know, big high profile organizations. They got hacked just before the new standard came in, GDPR came in, and they were, I think, the first organization to actually get fined for that. So they got hacked, basically, you know, lost a lot of client information. So and now going through a lot of legal ramifications here. So massive legal impact to the organisation. Again, cyber never too far away, but straight away, you know, there was these organisations just dropping them like a hot brick. So massive impact to the organisation, and criticised a little bit for only you know, sending comms out to their big clients like Coles and Australia Post. So you know, every stakeholder is important, so you've got to remember that. But from a legal point of view, definitely still dealing with that event. From a financial, then we've got Boeing. So Boeing had the issues with the 737 MAX aircraft that crashed last year. 2 of them, over 346 people died in that event. From a financial point of view, this has been devastating for this company. Last count was $18.7 billion they've lost through this event. You can imagine how many aircraft orders have been cancelled, put on hold, and COVID is just, they've got a double whammy, you know, with the airlines. No one's buying planes, right? So I just don't know how they're going to survive, to be honest. They seem to say they are. They've took on more debt to try and get through this, but you know, from a financial point of view, that is a massive impact to that organisation. And yeah, very interested to see how this one goes for them over the next few months. I think COVID was the final nail in the coffin for them. And then finally, from an operational point of view, operational impact, we look at toll. So toll, again, one of the things we're telling our clients through COVID is don't forget about your cyber. Cyber's actually increased, the threat of that has increased because we're all in this unsecure environment now where all of a sudden our people who were in a nice network in our offices are now working from home with, God knows what security. So these guys got a ransomware attack, and again, offline for, I believe they were manual. You can imagine how many parcels and stuff they're sending out every day for just over a week. So massive impact to that operational part of the business. Didn't pay the ransom and then got hit again a few weeks after that. So they've had a double whammy. They did do well with the communications, but from a cyber point of view, no one's safe, and it can actually really affect your operations. And we're seeing more and more of these organizations that yes, they're getting ransomware attacks, but actually it's impacting their operational part of their business. And for these guys, it certainly did that. We look at Merck's, the shipping company, who do thousands of containers every day through their ports. Same thing for those guys, got hacked a couple of years ago, $300–400 million worth of damage because they were manual for 10 days. So definitely seen a lot more of that from a cyber point of view through that operational impact of the organization. So there are just a few examples, and we could probably sit here all day talking about, even in the last few months, just the different events that are happening, and constantly we need to be on guard for this and be prepared. And basically that's what it's about. It's about having good crisis management, good business continuity in place is what we're recommending. And it does start with that business continuity piece. And our recommendation then is having effectively a business continuity life cycle, which you can roll out across your organization. And intertwined with that, there's going to be crisis management, development, incident management, whatever it might be. But we recommend this 4-step process then, which involves step 1 being that analysis and effectively program development. So, why do we want to do this? What's the objectives here? What are we trying to put in place? But actually, what do we do as an organization? And analyzing those components of your organization to determine really where our critical functions are, what are the showstoppers for us, what are the things that we need to put in place to prevent that. And that then comes through step 2, where we're actually developing these plans, response plans, again, possibly crisis management, could be IT. Now in there, a lot more people are going to be having pandemic plans, or what we like to refer to them as infectious disease plans. All of those things now will be probably sitting in that planning phase. But all of those plans in our recommendation are drafts until we actually validate them. So it's really important to once you create these plans, to actually give them to the teams that are going to be using them, individuals that are going to be using them, provide them with some training, provide them with scenario exercises, and actually, put them through a bit of a test to see how they're going to respond and work for you. So that validation piece for me, that step 3 is the critical component of this life cycle. So that we've got confidence that our guys can actually use these plans and develop them, because a lot of the time they're developed in isolation. There's someone creating them who may not be using it, handing it on to someone else. And then the last piece then is the maintenance piece. This is a continuous life cycle. When we develop our plans and our structures, it's not a one-off. It's not a stick it in a cupboard and it's going to work for you in five years. You've got to review it, update it, learn from your real events, learn from your exercises, and validate that. So just diving a bit deeper into each of those stages then. So one of the key components, and we'll talk about this in this session 2 next week, policy and program management, really getting that policy and document in place to govern the program and make sure that there's some control around it, and determine why we're actually doing this. What is the point of this? Who needs to know about this? We need to ensure that everyone in our organization is aware of what business continuity is all about. And our policy then really should be there to provide what our objectives are, what are our business continuity objectives, what is the scope? Are we actually doing business continuity for the whole of our business, or are we actually just focusing on what we would call our critical products and services? Who's actually doing it? Now, this is, when we talk about roles and responsibilities in our policy, we're not talking about what our business continuity team structure looks like. We're talking about who is going to own this program. And this is where obviously Kevin and James have been given this because they've got expertise in this area. So that, that needs to be clearly defined. And we do see, BC sitting in risk management quite a lot across organisations. But a lot of the time it is kind of like, oh, you do this, can you just chuck on this BC bit and do that as well? Thanks a lot. Yeah, exactly. And that's, it's all very well and good, but there's a lot involved, and we do see a lot of individuals who are just like trying to do all this on their own, and it's pretty unfair. So it's about sharing that workload, getting that identified, who's responsible, what's the framework for delivery going to look like, how are you going to roll this out, how are you going to implement it, i.e. implement steps 2, 3 and 4 as you go forward, and get it signed off, get the leadership buy-in. If you can get your policy signed off and agreed, then you've got that buy-in from the top, then everyone else should follow suit. And that's again, it doesn't sound much, but it actually, we see a huge difference in people that we deal with when they've got that leadership buy-in. And how can you expect your guys on the coalface to care about business continuity if it's not coming from the top? So also in step 1, then we have our business impact analysis. So again, those of you that have been in this world, we're very familiar with the BIA. It really is a foundation of how we build our business. How can we recover our critical functions if we don't know what the priorities are of those critical functions and what we actually do? And it sounds an obvious thing. We all know what we do, but we kind of just do get on and do it every day. The BIA really gives us an opportunity to sit there and analyse that, and what does it mean to us. Provides you with the data then for those recovery strategies, as I said. So how are we going to recover? How are we actually going to work from home through COVID? How are we going to do that? Well, the BIA is going to help you to make those decisions and be prepared for it. Identifies what we call the maximum allowable outage, so the MEO. So this is the maximum time that our process can be dead in the water before it starts to have an impact. People, legal, reputational, operational, all those impacts we talked about before. There will be a period of time that it can sit there, and we always find, and those of you that have done BIs before, human nature is, well, what I do is the most important thing in the world, so it needs to be up immediately. If it doesn't need to be up immediately, don't get it up immediately. You're just creating a rod for your own back. And this is where, it's really important that we justify when we're actually going to hit those impacts. What time period is it going to be before we see those impacts? Dependencies and resources, again, this whole COVID event has really highlighted the importance of knowing who can help us, who we need to get our system back and running, who are our third parties, what's our supply chain. The supply chain has been massively impacted, and we haven't really seen the real start of it yet globally. Supply chains are becoming more and more impacted. I was talking to a client last week down in Queenstown, New Zealand, and he was telling me that he was getting 7 of his sheds carpeted. He's a sheep shearer. And he told me that his carpenter said to him that there's going to be no carpet available in New Zealand in 3 months' time. I don't know where you got that statistic from, but it's like, well, that's crazy. We are going to start seeing that. Things are going to start running out, and we're not going to be able to get them. So, planning for what we do for that is so important. So in step 2, then we look at strategies. So this is really about how we're going to recover our critical functions, thinking about the way to do that, the different tactics and strategies we're going to put in place, and being able to achieve those things. And there are different options, and we'll talk more about these in the next session. But if we are having these very tight MEOs, these recovery times, then we've got to have really efficient strategies in place, which ultimately come with a cost. And that's why it's important that we understand and we don't try and recover things too quickly, because it ends up being expensive. And depending on the business you're in, you don't necessarily need to have hot standby sites available. Designing our threat mitigation measures. So part of our BIA process, we do look at threats, and we work in conjunction a little bit with our risk management people. Obviously, risk management will be looking at enterprise risk, and business continuity is more about disruption risk, but there is a crossover, and it's definitely worth, when you're going through and doing that analysis, to look at some of the mitigation measures that may not have been put in place originally through our risk assessments. Designing our incident response structure. So this is where we decide what our team is going to look like. And again, we'll talk a bit more about this, but how big is our team going to be? What roles do we need on there? As I said, they're individuals. Don't start with who the individuals are. Start with the roles, and then fill the roles with individuals. Otherwise, you'll just put people in a correct role because of what they do in the business. So think about, we need a team leader, we need an operational person, a logistics person, whatever it might be, and then fill the people into those roles from your organisation. Next then, in step 2 then, is our planning. So once we've created our teams and our strategies, we can actually put a plan together, our business continuity plan. So defined through our international standard, which some of you will be familiar with, 22301, as a documented procedure that allows us to respond, recover, and resume. And importantly, highlighted there is to a predefined level of operation. Now, that bit's really critical, because a lot of organizations, particularly in that leadership role, will expect you to recover back to just how we were. And that isn't always possible. And it's really critical to say, look, we've done our BIA and we cannot get the system back as quick as the business needs it, because whatever reason, maybe IT can't do it or whatever. That's our predetermined state, right? Don't have that as a surprise when you're in the middle of a crisis. So that's why that piece is so important. So look, we've gone through, and if the leadership of the organisation don't want to throw more money at this, then that is the level that they need to accept. We can only get 50% of people back. Then that needs to be defined and needs to be documented. So really important to have that in place. And our document then, it is a framework to help you to respond. A multitude of things can go wrong in your organization, and you can sit down with different people and they can have a massive list. If you try and create plans and recovery strategies for every eventuality, then your plan won't fit in the room and you won't be able to pick it up. It really is about a framework. So high-level checklists, high-level strategies to allow people to remind themselves of what are the steps that we need to go through to be able to get back, or start the process of recovery. At the end of the day, all of these things, whether it's a business continuity plan, crisis plan, an incident plan, it's still about the people. And that's the piece that, when we go back to that awareness, is providing the training, the capability for those people. The plans are there as a framework to help them. So bear that in mind if you're designing your plans, is keep it high level, don't overcomplicate it. Obviously, some organizations who are in maybe the manufacturing space will probably have a bit more detail in their processes, but generally we can recover across what I term as the 4 main strategies of loss of people. So for whatever reason we haven't got our people in place, denial of access to premises. So exactly what we're all going through at the moment with COVID. We can't get into our offices because the government have locked them down. We have to work from home. Loss of IT or IT communication. So any of our IT systems, if we've lost those, what are the impacts of that? What's the strategy for dealing with that? And the 4th one then is our loss of key suppliers. And again, we're starting to see that eventuating through COVID. Having clear strategies for each of those then will allow you to respond to any disruption that stops you getting in your building. And that's the piece that's really important, is that don't try and think of 3 different strategies for, fire, earthquake, flood. Ultimately, the impact is the same. You've lost your building. So what is the strategy for that? That will simplify your process and not overcomplicate these plans, because ultimately, if the plan is too hard for someone to use, then they're not going to use it. And it's a wasted exercise. The next piece then is the validation piece. So Awareness training, again, something that does get forgotten about. So don't forget about the rest of your staff. It's not just your crisis team or your business continuity team that you're training. Everyone needs to know what business continuity is all about. And this can just be an all staff, you know, even if it's a 30-minute lunchtime session, whatever it might be. Tell them what their responsibilities are in a business disruption. I do nothing, I go home. Fine, that's your responsibility. Or I have a critical process, I've actually got to do this. Make sure they understand and everyone's across it. And ultimately, you know, I always say that anyone that draws a salary from your organization is responsible for business continuity. We've all got to know what we need to do in an event, whether that's nothing or being part of a team. Scenario exercises. So probably as an organization, I think it's one of the most important things that we do. It really brings together everything, you know, levels, step 1, 2, 1 and 2 together, all of that analysis, all of that planning and validating what you've put down on a document, and also making sure that those individuals that you picked to be on that team are the right ones and they're going to be able to respond. The last thing we want to do is find out that our crisis leader is not a good person under pressure, right? Because they're probably going to fall to pieces in a real crisis. And we've seen that with, you know, Malaysia Airlines when MH390, I want to say, 370 went missing. Second day of that event, the crisis manager completely fell to pieces. They had to stand that person down. You've got to put people through scenario exercises. Yes, they're not the same as the real thing, but it will highlight where maybe people are not suited to particular roles. So give them that opportunity to move out. IT tests, so, you know, a scenario exercise, a desktop exercise, it's not a pass or fail event, because it's, you know, if we say, oh, we're going to recover our critical business functions and we kind of do it through notional, then it's not actually confirming that. Whereas a test, and that could be an IT test, we're actually doing a pass or fail. Yes, so we restored, or no, we didn't. We couldn't access email, or we could access email. So again, I can say this because I've worked in the IT industry, getting a message back from your service saying backup complete is not a test. That is not a confirmation that your backups are working. And I've seen it. I've seen people that have been backing up information for 3 years and realize that we're backing up fresh air. You've got to do these restores. You've got to do the tests. You've got to make sure that this stuff is going to work for you, and put your IT guys under pressure. And I think the IT guys around the world have never worked so hard over COVID, you know, finding out that all of a sudden you've got 500 people want to log in from home, something we'd never practiced or tested before. So really important that we're doing those things and making sure that, you know, everyone's got enough laptops, tokens, or whatever it might be. So that validation piece is so important for the whole program. And then the last piece, step 4, is that maintenance and audits. Obviously, you guys, some of you who've done audits before, important to go through that. If you're looking to go for accreditation, so you can go for that ISO 22301 accreditation business continuity. We are starting to see a few more organizations go for that. We've currently got a couple of clients that are doing that. It does provide you with that real accreditation of you've got, you know, a really good business continuity program in place and you're getting audited externally. We are seeing more and more, and I think we're going to see a lot more through COVID, of organizations saying, if you supply us with something, you need to demonstrate you've got good business continuity. In actual fact, I want to see your accreditation. And I think the world is definitely going to change, and we're going to see more and more people saying to their suppliers, you need to tell us how good your BC is, because we don't want it impacting us. So audits are really important. Get that third party or that external look. You can do obviously internal audits, but getting someone to come in and do that is going to give you that assurance to you and to your stakeholders that you've got good structures in place. And then maintenance as well. So maintenance, as I said, that continuous cycle, making sure that we go back, we redo our BIAs, we make the adjustments where we need to, we update our plans, we put everything in place to make sure this program is current, up to date. Everyone that's in the plan is actually still working for the business, etc. So that maintenance piece is really important to factor that into your life cycle of your program. So that's what we recommend is our continuity life cycle, if you like, business continuity. And as I said, out of that will come your different plans, your crisis structures, your incident teams, whatever it might be, to again loop back to that triangle response and say, yes, we've got good capability across tactical, operational, and strategic, and we can recover our strategies effectively. Anybody got any questions on our disruption preparedness and I guess what would be a good practice method to follow? All good? Excellent. All right, guys. Well, I've been rabbiting on for a while. What we'll do is we'll take a 5-minute break for a quick. We've got to be disciplined here. We want to make sure we get everything in. So yeah, just back at, I want to say 1:30 for me. No, I've lost it. Whatever. In 5 minutes. You know where you are, and we'll crack on. Thanks, guys.
Okay, well, can everyone just let me know when you're back and we can restart? Vanessa, Kevin, you seem to have lost someone. Sharon?
Yeah, he's just getting his coffee.
No, that's fine. He's going to need it for the second session.
It's not like, oh, for you it's an after lunch session. For us it's after breakfast.
Ah, to your Perth.
Perth, yeah.
So what? Sorry, what time is it with you now, Kevin?
9:30.
9:30. Oh, okay. I usually, if I'm going across, I go to New South Wales or Victoria, so I vaguely understand those time frames, but haven't been to Perth yet. So there we go. Okay, I think everybody's back, so we might as well just crack into it. So we're going to be looking at some information around pandemic response this afternoon. Brad's lumbered me with this one, which is a complete poison chalice because everyone has just been through a pandemic, so everyone is an expert right now. So we'll struggle through though. So I'm just going to share my screen. This is going to be PowerPoint heaven for a little while. Okay, so oops. So we're going to be obviously looking at pandemic information for the second half of this week's session. Just quickly run through the content there. So we'll be looking at what is a pandemic, what causes a pandemic, how does that happen, management at a national level, and also very briefly sort of what global management looks like, and then some information around organizational response. In terms of our outcomes, we want to understand how pandemics occur, what the modes of pandemic transmission are, various different ways that this happens, understanding what constitutes a national response and how that happens, and then at the end, how organizations can be resilient in a pandemic. So first of all, we're just going to look at a couple of definitions, and these are all either dictionary or WHO. So a novel virus, it's just one that's not previously been recorded. So at the beginning of the coronavirus, COVID-19, you'll have heard WHO and various national governments and health services talking about it as a novel virus, just one that hadn't been seen before. Influenza, COVID-19 is not an influenza virus, but influenza viruses cause more pandemics than other viruses. Outbreak, just an occurrence of a disease. We're not talking about war here. That's dictionary, not WHO, obviously. Just within a certain area. Endemic just describes a disease that is continuously prevalent in a group of people or a population. Epidemic, so it's within geographical boundaries, and then pandemic is when we have spread much wider. The WHO breaks the world up into different regions, and they say when there is community transmission in more than one region of the world, then we have a pandemic. Very quickly, viral pandemics and indeed some bacterial pandemics always start in animals, and they transmit from animal to human. Various ways of that happening: direct contact, indirect contact. So direct obviously being direct with the host, the animal. Indirect is often farmers or people involved in meat markets are the initial people who become infected, and that, you know, they're in and around animals but not directly perhaps in contact with them. Vector just means you've been bitten. Foodborne, obviously you've ingested it, and waterborne, you've drunk contaminated water. But those are the different methods that the virus or bacteria can leap from animal to human. So if we quickly talk about particularly viral pandemics, which is sort of what we're going to concentrate on today, as it is what we usually have. We've got 3 types of influenza, C, B and A. C is basically the common cold. It's pretty virulent, i.e. it transmits relatively easily, but it has a very low fatality rate, generally only in people with significant comorbidities, medical comorbidities. And A, at the other end, is highly virulent and often has a much more significant fatality rate. And B, which is in the middle, is often as virulent as A, but we never have pandemics of B because it just isn't quite at that level. But it can cause significant people to be significantly unwell and sometimes death. We will have heard people talk about an H1N1 or a H8N16. So these are the different proteins that sit on the surface of the virus, and the different proteins mark that virus to associate with different types of cell in the human body. Now, the influenza virus is one of the respiratory tract, but there are different areas within the respiratory tract. So some will just attach to the nasal passages, and some will attach themselves much deeper down in the lung, which can obviously cause much more significant disease. H is hemagglutinin and N is neuraminidase, and there are 144 different combinations from H1N1 to H9N16. Interestingly, well, some may think so, all influenzas originally come from birds, but have now transmitted themselves to obviously humans, but also pigs, horses, bats, and so we get a whole mixture of sources for viruses or for influenza pandemics. So when the WHO is looking at the progression of a novel virus to humans, we start with phase 1, where a virus is prevalent in animals but no known infections in humans. Then we move to when there has been an infection, and often we won't actually know at this stage that has happened. It's only when we start tracing backwards that we become aware of this. Scattered cases or small clusters in humans, and this is often when we get the first indication of a novel virus. Disease spreading from person to person within at community level, but within sort of single communities, and then starting to spread between humans and probably in more than one country of a single WHO region. And then, as we discussed earlier, more than one country in different regions have community level spread or outbreaks. And that really means that we're in a pandemic and that it will be very hard to stop this going globally. And they then have an informatic there that sort of describes from stage 1 to 5. So interestingly, we now have a top 10 of pandemics globally. So there have been many pandemics, but the top 10 pandemics, as described by the WHO. So the Antonine Plague of 165 AD, very minimal information around this, believed to either have been smallpox or potentially measles from the descriptions that there are, but they think about 5 million people died. It was brought back to Rome by soldiers in Mesopotamia, and it went all through Asia Minor, or what's modern day Turkey, Italy, Greece and Egypt. And then moving on, Justinian Plague of 1541. So this was the first recorded instance of a much longer outbreak or pandemic. They think 25 million people died, and we think it's the first time the bubonic plague was seen, and it went through southern Italy, Bulgaria and Turkey. Then we're starting to get much more information as we move sort of on in time. Black Death, which was again another bubonic plague, but this was the major bubonic plague outbreak, and you can see it went from about 1346 to 1353, which is quite a significant period of time, and they think anywhere between 70 and 200 million people in Europe, Africa and Asia died at that point. the third cholera pandemic, not the first, the third, about 1 million people died. We have 7 cholera pandemics in total. This originated in the Ganges in India and traveled through Europe and Asia, North America. And this was when it was determined that cholera was waterborne, and it's where most of our modern sewage and hygiene practices originate from. Oh, and that was the last cholera outbreak in the US. Then Asiatic or Russian flu, between 20 and 50 million people. Oh no, sorry. This is the flu pandemic that originated in Russia, travelled all the way through Russia and the Asiatic region for 2 years. It was believed to be an H2N3 because there were some specimens that survived, but I think that's a slightly sketchy bit of science there. To be honest, it would be hard to truly determine that. The 6th cholera pandemic, 1910 to 1911, 800,000 people died. Originated in India again and went through the Middle East, North Africa, Europe. And then flu pandemic of 17 to 20. This was what was often called Spanish flu, and it was H1N1. Now, called Spanish flu because it started during World War I, and none of the protagonists in World War I wanted to admit that they were being decimated by a pandemic, so nobody talked about it except for Spain, who thought, well, nobody else has got this, we need to tell everyone this is happening. So they told everyone it was happening in Spain, and so it became known as Spanish flu. Bit of pointless trivia for you there. They believe that 20 to 50 million people died, although some estimates put it as high as 75 to 100 million. 500 million people were infected. And this was the first flu pandemic that appeared to have high mortality rates for apparently healthy adults, not just children and more elderly people. Asian flu of 56 was highly virulent. Within 17 days of the first case in Hong Kong, it was seen in Singapore, and then it travelled throughout Asia, Europe, and the US. And then the last item is the HIV/AIDS pandemic. Now it says from 2005 to 2012 because this is when the greatest number of people were dying, and this was really when the first antivirals became really effective. We will be talking more about that later. It was first seen in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1976, and it's killed more than 36 million people. And they think there are now 35 million people living successfully with HIV/AIDS because of the antivirals, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, where 5% of the population is believed to have it. So we've looked at sort of where pandemics come from, some modes of transmission. So if we now look at sort of a different side of it and think about national pandemic management, so most countries will have or should have a pandemic management plan, which follows various phases, and then the WHO has a plan as well. So we're going to put up 3 plans here, 2 from different countries and 1 from the WHO. So in the top left, we have the Australian, obviously there's no detail there, and there's a lot more detail in the document, it's hundreds of pages long, but this is their sort of their structure, their framework. Then on the right, we have the New Zealand structure and framework, and then bottom left, we have the WHO. WHO doesn't manage patients like a national health framework does. They're looking at managing a global event, and so they're at a much more strategic higher level. So they talk about inter-pandemic phases, alert levels, the pandemic phase, transition phase back to the inter-pandemic phase, whereas the other ones talk much more in detail about, you know, what we're actually going to be doing. So let's look at the Australian and New Zealand ones in a little bit more detail. So if we think about the WHO diagram we had there, and they talked about the inter-pandemic phase, and this is really what the prevention phase here is looking at. So we're thinking about surveillance, global surveillance, with collaboration with various research facilities, and then obviously working with the WHO and funding the WHO, who are the sort of global alert and surveillance network for these diseases. Preparedness is really looking at when a novel infection has been identified, and there's probably been, we're starting to see transmission into humans and some community transmission. Really then we're dusting off plans, looking at resourcing the different areas that are going to need to be resourced, like the border management and public health units, and you know, our hospitals and primary care. Really trying to start digging directly into the specific infection that we're looking at, monitoring global surveillance, and then WHO could well during this phase be declaring a pandemic. And if we then look into the response phase, which has the three banners to the right, so standby, again, continuing surveillance, indication of activity within Australia, initial management of cases, cluster management, and you know, the WHO declaration, depending on how quickly the infection gets to Australia, could be in this phase. For New Zealand in 2009, the H1N1 virus, influenza virus, New Zealand was several days, if not a week, into infections within New Zealand, at the point where WHO declared. We had a group of school children coming back from Mexico who traveled from Mexico to LA and then to here, and a number of them had it and brought it back, and those people, some of the people on the plane were then infected, and that's how it spread within New Zealand. The action section of the response for Australia is really looking at, we have community transmission, case management, supporting the health system response, and a social and economic response. Stand down is so infections come on a bell curve always, and when you go over the peak of the bell curve, you know that at least in the first wave, infections are starting to diminish. Hopefully we're looking at returning to a business as usual stance, both within the health systems, socially and economically. And then in the last phase, the recovery phase, we're really looking at health sector recovery, economy and social recovery, while still being aware of a potential second wave. New Zealand is very similar. Really, there's just a little bit more detail in their framework. We're looking at goals at the top, and then moving down into the 6 phases that New Zealand sets out. Plan for it being the inter-pandemic phase, keeping out being an attempt to keep the disease from New Zealand, stamp it out being that initial cluster management or case management, contact tracing, trying to limit infections, manage it being really when we have community transmission and we know that we can't keep it out of the country, so how do we manage it, and then manage post-peak and recover from it being, you know, returning to usual while still having surveillance in place for a potential second wave. Interestingly, WHO doesn't think that New Zealand has had a first wave yet. We put border controls in place quite quickly, and have had, interestingly, very similar numbers to Australia. If you look at a per capita, on a per capita level, we went into complete lockdown with slightly more vigorous controls on that than the various states in Australia did. But interestingly, the numbers across Australia and New Zealand are very similar. And so there's quite a bit of debate about, what is the right approach. And I think that's impossible to say, really. Although Australia and New Zealand are obviously seeing far lower numbers of infections and deaths than many other significant countries. So there is an argument that says, that the national management, and in Australia, the state management of this event has been very positive. Of course, if we look at moving forward the next few years, how this will affect our economies as opposed to other economies will be interesting to see. Europe's already opening up for tourism, whereas we're obviously going to have to be shutting ourselves out to a certain degree. So the long-term ramifications of the management that Australia and New Zealand chose, very unpredictable, but be interesting to see. So I should have been speaking through those, I'm sorry. So those are the sort of descriptions of the phases for New Zealand. So we're about halfway through. Does anybody have any questions? If not, we will just move straight on. So in terms of measures to combat a pandemic at a sort of social and organizational level, the terms we've all been hearing recently, social distancing, hygiene, when is a vaccine going to be ready? Are antiviral medications effective? So if we quickly look at these, antiviral medication and vaccine are medical management, so we'll group those together when we're looking at them. And I'm sure we're aware social distancing is any measure designed to reduce the spread through creating distance. So the broad strokes for this are banning mass gatherings. Obviously, mass gatherings, lots of people together, a high risk of transmission. And interestingly, we're already seeing from the small numbers of, from the numbers that were at the Tulsa rally for President Trump, we're already seeing increasing numbers within that group that went to that rally. Isolation and quarantine. Now, often this is initially at the border, and anyone who is symptomatic, could be symptomatic, will be put into isolation or quarantine. I was in the UK and came back the day after New Zealand went into lockdown. I was luckily able to quarantine at home, but they were being quite strict about it, and I was visited by the police and had various phone calls from public health units to ensure that I was staying at home. And obviously that's someone who could potentially have it. We're trying to limit their movement and their potential for spreading the disease. Obviously, we've all been, maintaining that 2-meter distance between us and other people. And then at a societal level, lockdown, for 4.5 weeks here, we were at home, only essential services were running in an attempt to halt the spread of the disease. And we effectively went through 2 full life cycles of the disease to achieve not eradication, but very few numbers. Interestingly, the extra days that were tacked on the end were because we had a bank holiday weekend here, a public holiday weekend, and I think the government were concerned that everyone would just run out and start spreading the disease again, so we extended it beyond the public holiday. Another bit of useless trivia, the first reference to social distancing is in the Old Testament, where they talk about sending people with leprosy to leper colonies, not because they deemed them unclean or anything like that, but because they understood that through contact you could spread the disease, and so isolating people away from everyone else was a way of limiting the spread of the disease. So social distancing is nothing new. In fact, another example of social distancing, is during H1N1 in 1917, when they thought this was a bacterial infection because they hadn't discovered viruses at that point, they staggered work start times. So across the country, instead of everyone starting at 8 or 9, people were starting at 6:30, 7, 7:30, 8, 8:30 to try and minimise the numbers of people all travelling at once. So even back then, they were aware of what could be a potentially useful method of limiting the spread of the disease. We talk about an infection having an RO, or a reproductive number, generally known as the R number, and it's just describes the number of people who will be infected if there are no controls and measures in place within a population. So if the disease has an R value of 2, then patient 0, who we can see on the left there, will infect 2 people, and they will infect 2 people, and so on and so on and so on. And so when you get above the magic 1 in the R number, you start to see exponential growth. So this is looking at projected numbers over 60 days with an R value, the different R values there, starting with 1,000 cases. Interestingly, even with an R value of less than 1, you still get an increase in numbers, although minimal compared to an R value of 1.1 or higher. And I think there are various predictions or various hypotheses of the R value of COVID-19, and they range from anywhere about 1.8 to 3.7. So it's still slightly vague at the minute, but in the coming years, once research has been done, we'll understand that a bit better. So this was Dr. Tedros, whose surname I'm afraid I'm not going to attempt to pronounce, who's the DG of the WHO. He made this statement 3 days after declaring the pandemic, and he talks about it being the first pandemic that we could potentially control. And it's really interesting when you look at the different measures that have been taken around the world and how quickly they were implemented, being the biggest factor, because the UK went into lockdown, but just far too late. Australia and New Zealand have effectively controlled the spread of the pandemic through early action. So hygiene, being the second on our list, is the second biggest effective measure we currently have in combating a pandemic. Obviously, once a vaccine is in place, that's the ultimate measure, but we'll talk about those in just a moment. Hand washing being the biggest measure within hygiene. So the virus that you can see in the background there, the projectiles on the surface are the H's and the N's, and then the layer that they sit on is a lipid base, which is broken down by warm soapy water. And so wash effectively, rinse and then dry effectively, and you effectively kill the virus. Sorry. So cough and sneeze etiquette. Obviously, not obviously, sorry. Pandemics caused by an infection which is in the respiratory tract will be spread through coughs and sneezes. Generally speaking, those are influenzas, but COVID is a coronavirus, not an influenza virus, and it still is spread through cough and sneezes. And that's just through droplets of water in the respiratory tract being expelled from the body quickly, containing virus, and they sit in the air for a while. And obviously then if you inhale them, that's a problem. We'll talk about masks in just a moment. Cleaning of often used spaces, so door handles, desks, kitchens, toilets, with warm soapy water or some form of detergent, obviously just reduces the chance of transmission. Now, PPE, personal protective equipment, can range from anything from a paper mask through to the little square surgical masks, through to a P2 or N95 mask, which is actually has the ability to, if used correctly, filter viruses or small particles, up to goggles, visors, suits, gloves, and if you are going the whole hog and you're with an extremely dangerous virus like Ebola, then you'll wear a gas suit that filters the air as it enters the suit, or you wear a scuba type array to allow you to breathe properly. When we started this pandemic, the advice was very much masks will do very little. WHO is now looking at various bits of research that have been done and is tentatively saying that the wearing of masks, if you are potentially infective, i.e. you can infect other people, is a good idea, and that you can limit the off-gassing of viruses through respiratory expulsion through wearing a mask. For other people, the only real value shown has been if you are sharing confined spaces, like if you're working in an office with a number of other people, or you're traveling to work on a train or a bus for a period of time, lots of people breathing can build up a viral load within that area if the air is not being moved in and out and cleaned. And there is value in wearing masks then, but a mask is more effective in stopping you infecting other people than it is the flip side, stopping other people getting the disease, if you see what I mean. Talking about disease management, we have antiviral medication and vaccines. We'll get to vaccines in a minute. Antiviral medication is relatively young. Viruses were discovered after bacteria and after penicillin by Alexander Fleming. He discovered viruses in 1928, and the first antiviral medication was seen in the 60s. So it took quite a long time to understand viruses and then start to develop antiviral medication, which is slightly hit and miss still, but a lot of research, time and money went into HIV antivirals, and they're really successful, hence why 30 to 35 million people are living quite safely with HIV globally currently. There are different modes of operation. So we saw those surface proteins on the virus. You can see them in the background there. The initial antiviral medication aimed to destroy those proteins, but unfortunately they're very similar to proteins that exist within the body and are quite essential. So there were some significant side effects to initial antiviral medication. So we've moved on from that. So some of the antiviral medication aims to destroy that lipid layer that the proteins sit on. Some of them aim to block the receptors that the viruses sit on within the body and the cells, so the virus can't actually adhere to a cell and then reproduce. Some aim to stimulate the immune system to combat the viruses. And then the most common general antivirals, which are Tamiflu and Relenza, they inhibit the release of reproduced viruses from the cells in the body by sort of coating the cells. So there's lots of different methods that antivirals take. They're still pretty young, and still there's a lot to understand about them, which is why we don't have antivirals for every occasion currently. And broad spectrum antivirals are even younger still and much less effective than broad spectrum antibiotics. Interestingly, the Egyptians, more useless information, used to use moldy bread on infected wounds. The mold containing penicillin was deemed to help with infected wounds. Anyway, that's not really massively relevant to antivirals, sorry. Another problem we have is that whilst it takes a bacteria quite a while to build up immunity or resistance to an antibiotic, viruses mutate very quickly, and so an antiviral that is specific to a type of virus could quite quickly become, and has in the past quite quickly become, useless because the virus has mutated. So some real challenges with antiviral medication. Vaccines are highly effective, and we have seen smallpox has been eradicated, and for many years measles and other viral diseases were very uncommon, but with a lack of vaccinations, we are seeing an increase in those diseases. They are very slow to produce, typically 8 to 10 years to produce a vaccine, but once they are in place, they are highly effective. So vaccines create herd immunity. There are other ways of creating herd immunity, but vaccines create herd immunity. So the immunity threshold level is different for every virus. And this basically means this is the percentage of the population that need to be able to contract a disease for it to be able to spread within the community. So therefore, if we wish to have herd immunity, the level of herd immunity needs to be higher than the threshold level. So for instance, measles has a threshold level of 94%. And so therefore we have to have herd immunity within the population of higher than 95%. Currently, COVID's thought to be approximately 70%, but like the R value, the reproduction value, it's still very much an estimate. So the other way that we can achieve herd immunity is through historic infection. So the 1917 Spanish flu was an H1N1 virus, as was the virus that caused the 2009 pandemic. And people who were still alive from 1917, 1918 through to 1920 still had immunity to that disease, although obviously in 2009 the numbers of people who were still alive that had immunity were quite low. And obviously a vaccine will create herd immunity. So in terms of planning, Brad was talking earlier about different types of planning and different phases of planning. Pandemic planning sits within our sort of overall hierarchy or portfolio of planning underneath business continuity. So there we have the board representing governance over the board of an organisation, representing governance over the emergency planning or resilience plans, going from left to right. ITDRs, IT disaster recovery, which is looking at hardware applications and data. Emergency response planning was part of what Brad was talking about earlier. It's very much plans to protect people and places and assets against predictable events, and this is all the warden schemes or ECO schemes are part of the emergency response planning. Business continuity planning doesn't really concern itself with what has caused a disruption, but there has been a disruption, and as Brad was saying earlier, how do we restart our business and get things up and running again? We need to know what are our critical processes and how quickly we get them back up and running, and we then create strategies to pick from to help with recovery. And pandemic management planning sits firmly within the strategies of business continuity planning around people. What do we do if we've lost people permanently or temporarily? So our pandemic management planning sits firmly under business continuity planning, but it does rely on all of the other spheres or all the other resilience areas in order to be effective. So crisis management planning, really looking at how an organisation structures itself to respond. That's really important within a pandemic response as well. And if we look at pandemic management planning in relation to the pyramid that we saw earlier, then this really straddles the pandemic management component of business continuity planning really straddles between levels 2 and 3. So our senior management team, which is really involved in the operational response, as well as our leadership team, which is concerned with crisis management, governance and strategic planning. So it straddles both of those levels. So we have a few minutes left. So I don't know if anyone has any really interesting experiences from the last 3 or 4 months that would be worth just having a discussion about. If so, then we can absolutely do that now. If not, then we can hand back to Brad to complete the session and talk about next time. I'm just going to take a sip of water, excuse me, because that was almost non-stop.
Yeah, I think, guys, I'd be interested to know, because I think I mentioned before, you know, in the past we've certainly seen organisations have some form of pandemic planning, probably hardly ever used, and then having to pull something out, obviously in COVID, just understanding, you know, what level of preparedness you had in that space. Was it a pandemic plan or was it an infectious disease plan? And did it actually get pulled and get used?
Well, we can say that we had a very old pandemic plan, and once we read it, we realised it was not even close to what we needed. So it was just a total rewrite.
Yeah, yeah, and that, I think that's pretty common. Sharon, you look like you've got a comment.
I was just going to say, we didn't have a pandemic plan per se, but we do have a pretty extensive crisis management plan and business continuity, and we had spent a lot of time updating. We actually had a business continuity management audit around the same time, and so we had updated a lot of our documents and worked through the areas of the business on our business impact analysis. And yeah, we made the decision really before the government said we have to work from home. So we're actually, it actually worked quite seamlessly, which was good to hear. But I think it's certainly something that we need to put in place now.
Yeah. So done a couple of reviews for clients of their response, and one of the things, so just completed one at the very end of last week, and one of the things that really came out from that was a lack of, well, roles and responsibilities within the crisis management plan really needed to be very firmly established, so that people knew exactly, you know, whose role was what and what was part of that role. Trying to keep documentation consistent and communicating with their workforce appropriately. Those are the three big things that they felt they hadn't done well. And actually, there was a large supermarket chain across Australia, but actually they had, you know, their response had been pretty phenomenal, and they got most of the things in place before that was what was recommended. But they were being quite hypercritical of themselves, and they felt that those were the areas they could really improve on.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point there, Sharon. It is a lot of people, or a lot of organisations we've seen are very obviously pandemic focused, and so no, we need to get a pandemic plan. But actually, you know, if you haven't already got a good crisis business continuity structure in place, it will help you through. Obviously, there's, you know, the social distancing piece and all the hygiene stuff is very pandemic specific, but the actual response piece, particularly when we're all told to work from home, you know, that's a strategy that can be used, as I said at the beginning, for a multitude of things. So I think, you know, that's where I think organisations have seen the benefit of actually doing this work prior, and we've actually had people say that to us in our, thank God we did a BIA, because, you know, 2 days into the event, our leadership team said, right, where's all our critical functions? And they just produced a report, you know. So definitely, this is, you know, this event has heightened resilience like no other event, without a doubt. But actually, there's not a lot that's changed, if you know what I mean. It's like, this is what we should have been planning and preparing for. So don't all freak out and think you've got to go and get this magic pandemic plan. You know, it's like, it's a response structure that you need, and be able to cope with these different things. And Natalie, I'd be interested to hear, obviously you've got the in the environment where obviously you've got your staff, but you've also got that student element. How difficult was that for your organisation to make sure that you were getting good messaging to staff, but also, you know, your students who obviously were maybe feeling vulnerable?
Yeah, so we were quite lucky, I suppose, in that we updated our pandemic plan mid-January. So we were also ahead of the curve there.
Yeah.
So obviously the university has many campuses, and our campuses are suburbs practically.
Yeah.
So it can be a bit of a nightmare to manage, especially with students, and that was multifaceted. We have international students who were in China on Chinese New Year who couldn't come back to campus, who are still in China. So we had to look at all of our learning and teaching activities. We had to look at absenteeism across the board. So not just from a staff perspective, but that our students can't attend.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. And did you manage to do remote learning?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
We are not a remote learning university. We pride ourselves on our face-to-face experience.
Yeah.
But we quickly converted 2 weeks prior to Easter to full online capability.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, you know, that's amazing, because I've spoke to other educational institutions and it's the same thing. They kind of used a bit of that, but you know, it was a tool that was there, never really used it. Now it's like they're critical bit of software, because without it they can't teach. So that's how, and we'll talk about obviously when we look at the threats, how the environment has changed, that all of a sudden these pieces of equipment that were there are now critical to us, and what are the threats that go along with that. And we've created these new threats, possibly through an IT type event now, or a cyber event, or whatever it might be. Interested to know, just briefly from anyone, what as an organisation are you now going to do differently because of this event? So I know I saw in the news a couple of weeks ago, AMP, big insurer company here in New Zealand, closing Auckland and Wellington offices down. It's just everyone's working from home. It's incredible, massive company. So yeah, interested to know if any thoughts around what that environment looks like going forward.
I'll just quickly speak from university
Sure.
perspective then. Look, we've got a long list of things that we'll be doing differently. I'm sure everybody's got their list. Yeah, look, for us, we have, like most businesses, we have a vast contingent of people that travel.
Yeah.
Especially we have, you know, international students that come on board. We also have exchange programs for our domestic students who go overseas. So for us, one of the huge challenges was managing travel, managing where people were. Not everybody registered like they were supposed to, emergency evacing people through one of our third-party providers. Yeah, that has been a major challenge, and something that travel policy is being reviewed as we speak.
Yeah, indeed.
I think for our organisation, we surprisingly have found people, like, we've had no drop in productivity. If anything, it's gone up in a lot of areas. So our customer service teams who are on the phone, they've been trialing soft phones, which means they can kind of work from anywhere if we have split teams. So some come back into the office and some don't. At the moment, everyone's still working from home, but I think people are really keen to continue those flexible working arrangements. So even though we've had them in the past, I think that will really become even more so, especially when we have so many staff, like Natalie was saying, travelling to the office. So yeah.
Yeah, I think not sure what the public transport situation is like in Australia, but I think people are, well, I do know what it's like, but I don't know what it's like at the moment. But yeah, people are probably not too keen to be getting back on trains or buses at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. What about WA? What's any changes for you guys?
With the Department of Finance over here is that working from home was actually quite a seamless approach for us. We did do Teams approach. Oh, that's James.
James, can you a bit closer to the mic?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because what we found in West Australia is that working from home, we managed to transition to that quite seamlessly. We initially used the Teams approach to test it out, and also it gave the ICT guys an opportunity to see the capacity of our systems to be able to deal with people logging in from home. And then when it was determined that the system could handle it, then progressively everyone was working from home. I think about 90% of people were working from home for about 5 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So what's come out of it, we've done a survey of staff, and a lot of people now, I think about 85%, were actually quite supportive of the idea of being able to work from home. Not necessarily like 100% of the time, but being able to have that opportunity, especially depending on your nature of work that you're dealing with, report writing or something similar. You can actually do that quite easily from home and not have to travel into work, especially if you live further out from the city. And we're actually in the process of rewriting a working from home policy to allow that greater flexibility. And what we found is that it really didn't have any impact on our productivity. We're able to deliver services to the public all the way through. So it's been quite an effective approach. And on Thursday, I think our critical incident team that we've established here, we're getting together to do a little bit of lessons learned today, to see what went well, what could have been done better.
Yeah.
The pandemic hasn't finished, but at least we thought, while everything's still fresh in your head, it's a good idea to dump it down and document it. Because all our critical incident team meetings, we've monitored those, and also as part of our corporate executive, they had a standing agenda item to deal with COVID-19. So we've got a fair bit of records of what decisions were made, when they were made, and it will enable us, because down the track, probably towards the latter part of the year, I think, we'll probably look at doing an independent review of the whole Department of Finance response to COVID-19, and then use that as a basis to just improve our process and procedures and how things go forward. Because in WA, we're seen as one of the lead agencies of public service. So the lessons that we derive, we will then sort of just pass those through to the rest of the public service.
Yep.
So it's been a good exercise.
Part of the reason we flowed it so well into it is because we actually work in an activity-based working environment anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, we already have laptops. We've already tested work from. Everybody's already worked from home at least once. So just to increase numbers, we went into 2 teams of 40% of our staff in each team, and then combined a lot after a certain period. So
yeah,
it worked well for us.
And in Western Australia, I think we're stage 4, stage 5, stage 4. So basically, we're nearly back to, because our sort of situation in Western Australia is very similar to New Zealand, in that I think we've only got 4 active cases left, but they're all from overseas.
Right.
And pretty much we're almost going back to a system, back to normal in Western Australia. Some other states like Victoria, in particular, they've got quite a significant spike at the moment. And I know our Premier in Western Australia is basically, we were looking at opening our borders up on the 4th of August.
Right.
But based on what's happened to Victoria, that's been canned.
Yeah.
It's uncertain now when the West Australian borders are going to be open. So their plan, I think our plan is basically get WA sorted out, get back to business, and then we'll see how things are progressing interstate and interstate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the key things there you mentioned for me is learning from this. So yeah, if we don't learn from this incident, we're never going to learn from any incident. There's so much opportunity here, and what generally should happen is those 4 phases that you kind of touch on there. So that response, the management phase, which New Zealand is coming out of that management phase. I think some parts of Australia are still in that management phase, like you guys with only 4 cases are probably into the next phase, which is the recovery piece. And then the final piece is the review piece. But yeah, so important even to stop halfway through in that management piece and do a debrief of how you responded. Don't wait right until the end, because this event is going to be a long, post-incident review for this event is probably going to be next year, probably even for New Zealand. So do that debrief halfway through of each of the phases. So how do we recover? How do we manage? How do we respond? How do we manage? How do we recover? And then the final piece at the end is that PRI, where you're doing the whole picture. And from a best practice compliance point of view, we should be exercising at least annually. This event can be used as your annual exercise. As long as you do a review, you provide some findings and recommendations for improvement. So, that document then becomes a living beast that you can provide to your potential new clients or whatever. So really important to do that. And, certainly with some of my overseas clients, they've gone into because they reacted early, they've gone into a kind of complacent response, where they're just kind of taking their finger off the pulse. But it's like, this is the time to be doing those debriefs, reassessing your threat environment, etc. Well, you've got that period of time and say, well, what's around the corner for us potentially? And already we're seeing businesses that getting hit with cyber attacks right in the middle of a crisis, and not what you want to be happening. So yeah, really important to do those phases, which is great. All right, guys, look, it sounds like it's good to hear. I love hearing the different stories of how people are responding and what you're doing. And it's fascinating in Australia with the different states. They're just doing such different things. It must be really challenging, because New Zealand's just like one big state, we're all doing the same thing. But so yeah, quite interesting. Obviously, we've got offices in we've got people in all Perth, Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane. So our Adelaide team are very proud about how they're doing, because they've got, I think, good numbers as well, and we've got one guy over in Perth. But yeah, Victoria are a bit like, oh, sorry guys, we're destroying it for the rest of the country, so, which is crazy times. All right, guys, so we're just about out of time. Thank you for everyone's participation. I hope that was useful. We will, what you'll get is an email will come out after this session, a bit later on this afternoon, which will have next week's agenda. There'll be a handout for this session that you can take away and keep, and a little bit of homework, because every day's a school day, right? So I thought I'd just give a little, nothing too drastic, but just I guess a follow-on really of the incident response triangle, and just to give you guys the opportunity to maybe have that lens over your business and say, actually, do we have coverage across these 3 areas, and what does that look like? It's always a worthwhile exercise. Depending on what you do in the business, you might not be responsible for emergency management, but you might say, just touch base with Chief Warden and go, when's the last time I did a drill, or whatever. So that's all it is, and then we'll just kind of have a bit of a review of that when we start the next session next week. Any final questions? Hi, Mark. We have recorded this, Mark, so we'll make that available for you, so you can see what we've done. But yeah, and hopefully we'll see you next time. And yeah, hope everybody has a great week, and stay safe, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.